Hi there, my name is Phil Kurth. I'm the co-creator and developer of the ACF Custom Database Tables plugin, and I'd like to give you a brief look at what the plugin does so that you can decide whether or not this plugin is right for you. So now before we dive into the nuts and bolts, a high-level overview. Now basically what this plugin does is it creates database tables that mirror the structure of your chosen field groups. Now when you choose a field group to have a database table, any eligible fields within that field group will end up being a column in your custom database table. Okay, so the other thing that it does is it hooks into ACF's API functions. So we're talking get field, update field, the things that you use a lot in your templates in WordPress. It hooks into those in order to store and retrieve data to and from your custom database tables. Okay, so that's basically the broad overview of it. Now let's dive right in and have a look at how you'd go about creating a table from a field group. So I'm going to jump into the admin here where I've got a bunch of field groups set up, and there's a whole bunch of post types as well, but the one we're going to focus on is the book post type, and I've got a book field group set up right here. So I'm going to click on book, and I've got all my fields set up, and I've linked that post type to I've linked the field group to a post type of book, and then what I'm going to do is come all the way down here and I'm going to activate the table and I'm going to name it. So I'm going to call it books, okay? And then I'm going to come up here and save the field group, and in doing so, behind the scenes, I've created a JSON file which contains the table mapping, and if you're curious, you can jump into your ACF JSON directory and you can check out your table definition here, but we won't go into that too much at the moment. So basically this bit of output here is what you probably want to review and make sure that the columns are what you want them to be. Yeah, so the next stage to creating this table is then to essentially apply the definition to the database. So at this stage, all we've got is a JSON file which carries the table definition. Okay, now we're going to apply that to the database. So we do that by clicking on this blue button down here, and you can have a read through this in your own time, but basically going to check this box, and then we're going to hit create update tables. And what that does is it rounds up all the definition JSON files you've got, it converts all the JSON to SQL, and then it passes it into WordPress's DB Delta function, which modifies the database. Okay, now if I come over to my database now and I reload this table list, you'll see that we have the WP Books table, and we have a whole bunch of columns that are reflecting the fields that we had in that field group. Now, if I go over to a book post, and I've already got data in these, so if I save this post and I come back and look at my table, we're going to see a row of data. Okay, so all of our data, which would usually be across many rows in post meta, is now in one single row in a custom table. And if I, just to show you how that looks when we get a few, I mean, I'm sure you can infer what's going to happen here, but now we have a second row of data. So each post has its own row of data. Okay, so this is obviously a lot more portable, it's a lot easier to search, and yeah, it's just more sensible than the model that we're used to working with. So that's pretty much how you go about creating custom tables for a field group. From this point forward, the plugin's internals take over, and they basically, like I said, they hook into ACF's API functions, and your data will now be, say, stored and retrieved from your custom table. So there are a few additional features built into the plugin, which I'm just going to step through now. The first of which being that you can prevent fields from generating columns in your table. Okay, so to do that, you'd use a filter which you could find in the help tab of our, basically in custom fields database tables. We've got a help tab over here, lots and lots of useful info, but also a bunch of code snippets. So you can find this one called disabling fields for a particular table, okay, and then you would just copy the snippet, drop it in your functions.php file, and just make sure these data points, like your table name and the field names, are correct. And then the next time that you save a field group, those fields there, they won't be a part of your table definition. So basically, they won't be in the definition, so the next time that you apply your definitions to your database, they won't generate columns, or they won't effectively be in your table mapping. So another feature that we've baked in is the ability to disable storage of core meta for metadata that is mapped to a custom table. So what does that mean? So by default, this plugin, it still stores, or it still allows WordPress and ACF to store this data in the core meta tables like post meta as it normally would. The reason we do this by default is because it keeps your site as compatible as possible with a lot of the third-party extensions which might depend on accessing the post meta table directly. So by having data duplicated in this sense, you maintain compatibility with the WordPress ecosystem. However, if you find yourself in a situation where you just know that you don't need the data in your post meta table, you can use some of the snippets we've got in our help tab. So let me find the snippet. So bypassing data storage in core meta tables, you can use these two snippets here. So this one here disables ACF value storage in the core meta tables, and this one here disables ACF key reference storage in the core meta tables. If you're not using ACF JSON, stay away from this one, because if you're not using ACF JSON and you use this, your fields aren't going to be able to retrieve the data on the front end of your website. But you can still use this one here and basically prevent the metadata from being stored, the actual the values themselves from being stored in the core meta tables. Again, I'm just a friendly warning, like, only use this if you're absolutely sure you don't need those core meta tables, okay? Like, because yeah, we want to avoid as many problems as we can. We want to avoid as many problems as possible. So look, another helpful feature, eligible relational fields can be configured to create join tables. Okay, so what does that mean? All right, so look, basically some of these fields in ACF are called relational fields, and what they do is they tend to store arrays of values, and usually arrays of IDs, right? So author IDs, supplier IDs, store IDs, they're all just relationship fields. Now, if you're familiar with the core meta tables, you've got like term relationships where things get stored out in sort of individual numbers in columns. Well, what you can do is you can start to move some of this metadata into that format as well. And you do that also through the use of a code snippet. Now, I'm just going to grab this snippet here that I've already configured. All right. Now, this is basically saying that for our books table, if the field's name is author ID, allow it to create a join table. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll come back over to my field group here, and I'll come back over to book. Now, when I save this field group, you'll see that the columns, it's one field shorter, and now we have this join table called books __ author ID. And then if we manage our database tables, and we go through this process here, we've gone and we've now created a second table, which is our join table. And if we look at our database, we'll see that we've got this join table here that's got ID, that's just an auto increment column. We've got post ID, author ID, and the sort order is an internal thing that we use to maintain drag and drop sorting of ACF, so you don't need to worry about that. But what I'll do is I'll jump over to the post, that same book post, and we'll save that. Okay, so if I reload this table here, you're going to see, actually, all right, so we only have one author in there. So let me add a second author. It's a draft, doesn't matter. So we'll save that out, and you'll see that we now have multiple rows for the same post ID, and it's basically one row per author. So if you're doing lots of complex querying, like relational querying, this becomes a really handy feature. Okay, so you guys can explore that. We've got some documentation on that, so I'd encourage you to read it. So That is opt-in, by the way. None of that happens by default. So now look, another helpful feature is that custom field types can be registered through the use of a simple filter. So what that means is that if you've got a custom field type, so somebody's created a field type that isn't in ACF core. So for example, I'm using, for that book field group, you may or may not have noticed, but I'm using this price field, which is basically added by a third-party plugin. Now, for me to get that working, or for our plugin to sort of identify it as an eligible field, basically what I did is I have a code snippet down here. Again, this is in the help tab. We basically just say that if the field type is price, it is supported. Okay, so it's that simple for supporting a custom field. If you come across any custom fields that don't work properly, let us know about it, and we'll jump in and see what we can do about that. Now look, that's basically it for this intro. I hope it didn't go too long. If you have, we have a lot of things that we're working on. We have a lot of plans and a lot of ideas that we're going to be working on and releasing in the near future. But if you have any questions or any suggestions, then feel free to email us at support@hookturn.io. Yeah, we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thanks for watching, and we hope to speak to you soon.